Casting prop stunt daggers using FP-90 polyurethane rubber. Now, this is from a recent trip I made out to Fox and Superfine, the BJB distributor out in Atlanta, Georgia, or in the Atlanta, Georgia area. They're actually down in Fayetteville. And they made this using a TC5130F silicone mold, a two-piece mold. And hopefully in the future we could go back and visit them, and maybe when they're actually making the mold. Now, the first step here, this is Elizabeth, and she is going to be brushing in some metal powder into this mold, into this silicone mold, so that the cast will come out pre-colored in specific areas. Now, Elizabeth does this much better than I do. I've done some videos in the past where I've brushed in metal powders into silicone molds, but Elizabeth had some tricks for this that just made this process much cleaner than any of the tutorials I've done in the past. So pay close attention. Now again, the metal powder she's brushing in is a Sculpt Nouveau product, and of course you can find that in the video description. I will link to that. That is provided by Fox and Superfine, or you can get it through Sculpt Nouveau directly. But this is the trick that I thought was very important to this process. What she's doing here is using a Q-tip with some 99% alcohol to go back in and clean up any of that metal powder that gets anywhere it shouldn't go. So anytime she was getting the metal powder outside of the line, so to speak, she would go back in with that Q-tip with the 99% alcohol and then carefully remove that, and just made for a much cleaner application. So good to know. That's definitely one of those little shop tricks you want to take note of. And once she applied the metal powder to those key areas of the knife, the inside of both halves of the knife mold, then it's time to check out where the armature is going to go. Now, FP-90 is a pretty firm polyurethane rubber, but to stabilize that blade, what she's going to do is insert some carbon fiber. This is a long, thin piece of carbon fiber material, and this will stabilize that blade. Now, after she showed it to me here, she went and took it to the grinder and rounded off the tip. But this was a scrap piece of carbon fiber from another project they had going on, and then that becomes the stabilizer for the blade, or the armature. Now, FP-90, I pre-pigmented the part B for this with some 6902 black pigment. That's the phthalate-free polyurethane pigment, and that is a 2-to-1 mix ratio, 2 parts of B to 1 part of A. And real important, anytime you're using that, make sure you shake up that part B really well. Always check the jugs, make sure if it says shake up that part B or A or whatever, you want to make sure you do just that. Now, Elizabeth's casting process for this is very different from the way I would approach it, and a little bit more time consuming, but I think it produced much better results. So that's why I wanted to feature this in a video. She did several small batches, so here I am mixing up some for her. This is about a 60-gram batch, so about 40 grams of part B and 20 grams of part A. And just remember, when you're working in these small batches like this, you want to be as accurate as possible, because the smaller the batch size, the higher the chance for being off ratio. So you want to be really careful about that, because when you get down into these small batches, just being off by a couple of grams could wind up being 10 or 20%. So be very careful, be as accurate as possible anytime you're measuring out small batches of material. Now, this first batch that I'm mixing up, this is going to be put into the mold almost like a print coat for a brush-on mold, but in reverse. So Elizabeth is just going to pour that into both halves of the mold, and now from this viewpoint, you can see where that silver powder has been applied on the inside of the mold. So everywhere the silver powder is brushed, that will come out of the mold looking like polished metal, and the rest will look like kind of a dull matte finish metal. So the nice thing about that, putting the metal powder in, is it comes kind of built in on the part, since that polyurethane rubber will bond to that metal powder and pull it out of the mold. Now, of course, this is FP-90 that has been pigmented with the 6902 black pigment, and that is a polyurethane pigment. And real important to be aware of the working time. We have about a 4 to 5 minute working time at room temperature. So here Elizabeth is using, of course, her gloved hand to carefully pull that FP-90 up there on the edge of the blade, but staying just right at the seam. So of course, wearing gloves, you can easily do this. You can also use brushes like she's doing here. But again, this is something of a print coat put into the mold to establish that surface layer and make sure that it is bubble free. And then we're going to follow this up with another layer after this. But this way, she can ensure that the armature doesn't accidentally show through that surface. But again, we got to do all of this within that 4 to 5 minute working time, and no need to vacuum degas. I just posted a video last week on the process of making a spill mat, and for that one I did vacuum degas. For this application, there was no need to do that. I mean, it wouldn't hurt to do it, but just remember that is going to eat into your working time. And typically when you're using a brush like this or your finger to maneuver the material around, the viscosity on this is such where you typically don't get air entrapment on this kind of application. So once that layer has been applied, we're ready to let that gel and then mix and apply another layer. And remember, with polyurethanes, and this applies to silicones as well, anytime you're layering something up like this, you want to do this as quick as possible. As soon as the material gels, you want to proceed with your next layer, because if you wait too long, you'll get delamination, which means those different layers will not get a good bond and they'll just peel apart. So make sure as soon as you hit a point where the material has gelled, you're ready to proceed with the next layer. So for this process, I think we waited maybe about 10 or 15 minutes to apply the next layer. Now, I'm not going to show the mixing process for this second batch, but this is another batch mixed up exactly the same way, again with that pre-pigmented part B, and again just more FP-90. And this is just to build up the thickness very gradually. And one of the reasons she does this approach rather than just filling it up is it reduces the chance for air entrapment, but more importantly, it allows much more control about where she's putting the armature in that knife blade, and just making sure that that knife blade stays really thin, and then more importantly, also that we don't have the armature poking through any of those areas, which in a way could be a danger to an actor, and also just kill the realism of the prop. So again, this layer is just poured in and then carefully brushed into the detail. And as we were doing this, Elizabeth was telling me that this is also a really good approach for making foam-backed weapons, flexible foam-backed weapons. And she showed me a part from this same mold that she made where she used this approach, the FP-90, a thin layer brushed into the surface, and then she backed it with TC-266 to make a lightweight, flexible, another stunt prop for a different scene. And hopefully I'll show that process in a future video, because it made an absolutely beautiful part with a nice bubble-free surface, which is hard to do with expanding flexible foam in a mold with that kind of complexity. So again, here we're mixing up a small batch, but this time we're going to be thickening this using the FiberThick thickener. And the reason we're doing that is the FiberThick thickener converts this to a trowelable paste. And the nice thing with FiberThick, it is an inert thickening agent. It doesn't change the material chemically, so you can add as much or as little as you want. So if you add a little bit, you could get it just a higher viscosity, something with a little bit of slump to it, kind of like pancake batter, or you could add a lot and make it more like a frosting kind of consistency that you could smear or trowel into a mold. So FiberThick is a really good accessory to know about for these kinds of casting applications. So once that's mixed in, again, that gives us a nice thick trowelable consistency. And now Elizabeth is going to take that and spread that into the mold, again, filling some of those areas that to build up the thickness of the handle of the knife. And it's at this stage she's going to put the armature in place, that piece of carbon fiber. And that's where you'll see the end of it, how it's been rounded off here in just a minute. But real important, this is why timing is of the essence when you're building it up like this, because you want to make sure that that second layer that was brushed in is still a little bit on the tacky side, so it will bond to this carbon fiber. So here you see that carbon fiber piece with that rounded off tip. And it's going to go just shy of the tip so that, again, as this is being used in a stunt scene, you don't have to worry about that pokey end hurting anyone. And you see she's just pressing that down into that one side of the mold. And then she's going to let that set up a little bit more. And we'll follow that up with one more layer as she's gesturing there, smeared into the mold. So we're going to do one more layer thickened, and then put the mold together and pour up the remaining area, the remaining cavity in the handle with additional FP-90. Now, I skipped the mixing process because you get the idea, done exactly the same way. This is, again, about 15 minutes later. And now she's going to trowel in the rest of that FP-90, that thickened FP-90, on the inside. And she's going to do that on both halves of the mold and then clamp it all together. And again, real important when you're doing all these processes that are more complicated than just a regular pour, you want to be very aware of your working time. It's always a good idea to keep a smartphone timer that you start, say, set for 4 minutes, and you start it as soon as your parts A and B are put together in the same mixing cup, even before they are stirred together, because remember that mixing time starts as soon as those two things are combined. So now it's time to put those two halves together and clamp that together. And again, this is a TC5130F platinum silicone mold. And one of the reasons for that softer silicone, that's about a 25 Shore A. So some of you might do this with, say, something a little bit firmer, like, say, the 5140. But the reason for that softer material is that actually grabs that metallic powder better than some of the harder silicones. Now, once that's all clamped together, she's got another small batch of FP-90, and that's going to get poured into the handle of the knife to fill that up the rest of the way. And now we have our complete dagger. So multiple batches, but it's a much more thorough process that results in a beautiful part that is completely bubble-free. So when Elizabeth told me how she was going to do this, some of it kind of broke my brain for a second, but when I saw the results, it was definitely worth the extra effort. And my hat's off to Elizabeth, who just makes a much cleaner looking prop than I do. But I am a caveman thought out by your scientists. So now this is about 60 to 90 minutes later. And the reason for that 60 to 90 minute, that 30-minute difference is the cross section of the part. If you're working with a part that is a really thin cross section, that's going to take a little bit longer to cure as opposed to a thicker cross section. So there we have our finished knife. You see just a little bit oozed out there when the mold was clamped together, but super easy to trim off. And here is our dagger ready for cleanup. Now, as usual, I will link all of the products in the video description, as well as links to the Fox and Superfine store, so you can check them out as well. And here's a little view of the cleanup process. Overall, pretty straightforward. Elizabeth just used this razor blade to go in and remove the flashing, and there was very minimal flashing on this process. So overall, very clean process, which resulted in a really nice looking knife prop. So there you have the full process of casting a dagger using FP-90 and, of course, the Sculpt Nouveau metallic powder to color it, to pre-color that. And big thanks to John Baker and Elizabeth and the whole crew over there at Fox and Superfine and Storyteller Effects for letting me come out and play in their shop. Filmed a lot of cool stuff, so I'll be posting more of that in the days and weeks to come. But there is the final dagger, all nice and beautiful like. And as I mentioned, all of the links will be in the video description. And of course, you can find all of these materials, the FP-90, the fiber thick, and the pigments and all that, on bjbmaterials.com. Or you can also find the links to the Fox and Superfine store in the video description as well. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed the video. And as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. And please leave a like and a comment for the algorithm.